Okay, and we are live. Good evening, everyone. Make sure everyone can hear me, see me, everything else good. I think so. And wow, we have a nice amount of people already joining pretty quickly. Oh, good. There we are. Good. Everything is working. Okay, so let's see. We have a lot to talk about here. Obviously, there's a lot going on right now, as you probably have seen on Facebook and other social media. We are moving the studio, like the Weather Lab, and upgrading, and it's going to be exciting times. And I will share the changes that will be taking place, including the color of the Weather Lab. I want to explain this because I got a lot of pushback on that real fast. So the only color I see is red. I'm colorblind, and the only color I truly see is red. And so, when it comes to being comfortable, all right, I like to be surrounded by red things. It's not just that I like Christmas or the look of warning colors. It's because I just feel more comfortable. I literally get to focus better. So one of the things I've always wanted was a red office, a red Weather Lab, and I'm finally going to get it, so I'm really looking forward to that. And I'm curious to see whether or not my forecasting actually improves, because I'm able to zone in better and feel more comfortable, and it actually reduces my headaches and whatnot as well. So that's going to be interesting to see, along with installing the observation post, and I'm going to show that and make videos of that and share that online, and just the overall construction of the Weather Lab. And that's going to be a lot of fun to do over the next several weeks. So definitely check that out as we move forward. Now, we have a couple things that we have to cover. We have our storm that's coming up for Friday. Looks pretty warm for the most part, but it's a good lesson. Because remember, a couple of days ago, it was about maybe 5 days ago, there was a lot of talk because some of the models, like the European guidance, was producing a significant snowstorm. The perfect pattern setup. Why? Well, because we had the 50-50 low. It showed up. Boom, there it is. Perfect storm track. Then, as we got a little closer, that feature that was showing up in the model guidance, which really wasn't supported really well by the ensemble guidance, disappeared. And the storm track shifted north and west thereafter. Sounds like we're talking about another storm system, another one 10 days out, that is showing the same type of hope. So is this fool's gold once again, or is it an actual storm threat? We'll talk about that, and of course we'll also cover our storm, and guess what? It's meteorological spring, so we'll talk about the spring pattern as well. But first things first, let's tackle this storm, because I know I already got a lot of emails about it. It seems like as if everyone forgot about Friday, and we can't really do that because there's a couple of issues I want to touch on with that. But since that is the focus right now, I wanted to basically knock this out of the park and just say, okay, this is what I'm seeing. Here are my concerns. And premium members, we already had this discussion in the long range thoughts in terms of the MJO, in terms of the pattern overall. Okay, but in terms of this specific storm, let's pull up some of the data here. And we'll go to the 500 millibar pattern here. Where are you? Here we are. Okay. Winds. There we go. Okay, so here's what the European does. Okay, now I love this idea, and we'll zoom in a little bit so everyone can see it real nice. Look down this. Okay, so we start off with the idea here. We go 90 hours out, pretty reasonable, of high latitude blocking. Okay, I like where the European's going here to start off, right? You have support for a negative NAO, although east base, which matters, which basically means that your upper level low here with this blocking complex and the ridge complex is all focused more towards Iceland rather than the Canadian Maritimes, right? Now, 10 days ago, this feature was here, and this block was over here. But you can see the retrograde to the east. Why? Because the polar vortex ended up here around basically the Hudson Bay and central Canada. So it didn't allow for the block to really mature yet. We also have a pretty nice trough here over the west. And basically what this signifies is the result of the major stratospheric warming, which we've all been waiting for, and the disruption of the tropospheric polar vortex, that interaction which was achieved, basically blew up the polar vortex in the troposphere, and as a result, you end up with what we're seeing here. However, the La Nina influences still remain, and we know that's the case when we go look at the observations and pull up the SOI. So guys, I've been talking about the SOI forever, right? The SOI basically is your barometer in terms of atmospheric response to a ENSO event. So with El Nino, you get negative SOI values. With La Nina, you get positive SOI values. So for me, as a forecaster, I understand some forecasters don't go by this, but it pretty much has been working out pretty well for me for the past couple of years. When I see a sustained positive value, then I look for La Nina characteristics in the 500 millibar pattern. They can be overwhelmed, but they're still present in some form, so you have to account for it. Same thing when we flip. When we go to El Nino and we have a sustained negative value, then we have to look for those characteristics and those signals that usually show up in that environment. So we understand what environment we're in. And that's not going away in the next 10 days. That'll go away in the next maybe 30, 40 days. Okay, it's going to take time for this whole feature to fade away. So we have this factor here, and you can see in the operational how it gets to this block. What it does is that it allows for the retrograde of the negative NAO block to more of a west-based. And also, look what it's doing to this storm. It is amping it up. It is just ultimate warrioring it, all right? It's like, like if you guys remember wrestling back in the 80s and 90s, the Ultimate Warrior run out and he's like shaking the ropes and going nuts. That's what the European guidance is doing. It's just going nuts. It is ramping it up. It's running down the aisle, and it's crazy. And it's crushing everything in its path. So much so, it sets up this suppressed track. And naturally, when you look at this, the first thing you do, you pull up the Costa Mussolini book, and then people call this the KU storms. And you look at this and you say, wow, this signal is screaming major winter storm for the entire eastern United States. Entire eastern United States. You have your La Nina signal here getting displaced. You have the block that would force the storm track towards the coast. And you have a brief ridge here in the west. But before I get excited about this event, there are some warning signs. So this is by March 11th. So by this point, the MJO, let me pull this up here. Right here we are. Okay, the MJO at this point has reached a peak and starting to crash back towards a neutral state. This is a bit of a warning sign because typically when I see this happening with the MJO state and a crash, typically what happens is that the 500 millibar pattern isn't able to achieve the full influence of the MJO state. Sometimes that works out, sometimes it doesn't, but it's a warning sign that things may not be as positive or favorable as one might think when they look at the MJ08 phase. Okay, there's a warning sign here. It's a rapid punch and then collapse. So if it's a rapid punch and then collapse, how much influence does it have on the 500 millibar pattern globally? Or is this something where it's focused on a specific region in the tropical Pacific and it doesn't have the cascading influence that you would normally see in a phase 8? These are interesting questions to be asked, because the strength isn't sustained. So are you seeing more of an influence, more of a phase 7 rather than a phase 8? These are things that we're going to have to watch out for and study. But if everything came together just right, and you have this block set up just right, then yeah, game on. Storm potential. But remember, timing is key. We're going to be in mid-March by this point. So if this storm's going to be able to produce significant snowfall, you're going to have to deal with some of that sun angle issue. So again, I would really, really hazard against using those snow maps, the 10-to-1 ratio, all that stuff. But we'll get to that later. The warning sign I saw, though, was when I got to the ensemble guidance, the signal was nowhere near what was suggested here. Certainly a storm potential. That's certainly there. But the block in the Atlantic was more diffuse. And when you look at the individual model runs, the support for the NAO was more east-based than west-based, which means your storm track could be further inland than over the coastal waters with that perfect 70-40 benchmark track. So when I saw this right here, when I saw this means that we're seeing more of a focus here of this trough axis right around Iceland. That's an east-based negative NAO. That's a signal that should give you pause when you're looking at this before you start sending out signals and saying, oh, big storm on the way. Wait, hold it. We've been here before. We were here 10 days ago. Actually, well, more like 5 days ago. But you understand what I'm saying. The same 10 days out, here comes a major winter storm signal. But there were also signals that, hey, this might not be what you think it is. It might be further west. And so when you have that signal, what you end up with is this storm track, where it cuts up onto the coastal plain into eastern Pennsylvania. And yes, the interior definitely has snowfall potential, but the coastal plain, rain. Now, if you get that 50-50 low locked in, and it's as strong as what's being shown in the operational guidance, game on. Then you have something of interest around the 12th. Is it possible? Yes. I have already seen in my Discord and in social media the mention of the 93 superstorm. I just want to make this very clear. There's a reason why these storms are so special. It's because they're rare. Because they're really hard to pull off. Because everything went perfect. Or not so perfect if you were impacted by that storm, of course. So I personally try to stay away from those comparisons until we at the very least get under 120 hours and we have some concrete data to really work with. So just before we get ahead of ourselves, let's wait a little bit to see whether we actually end up with this 500 millibar pattern with more of an east-based negative NAO, which also is what the GFS is showing, which is why you're dealing with a completely different solution, by the way, or this solution, which has yet to happen so far this entire year. Say year because now we're in spring. We'll talk about spring in just a moment. Now, we do have another storm that we are keeping an eye on. And that, let me pull up the data here. Here comes our storm. Now, why is it going further west? Well, because the shortwave in the subtropical jet stream is slow to interact with the shortwaves in the polar jet stream, and then when it does, well, it's already gone to a negative tilt, and it heads right up towards the St. Lawrence River Valley. This is another primary low pressure system heading towards the St. Lawrence River Valley, redeveloping towards the Gulf of Alaska, and that means a warm front for our neck of the woods. And of course, that means warm air is going to be surging northward. So for the coastal plain, this is rain. You might see a blip of snow at the very start of this. I am concerned about the Poconos and Catskills. And let me pull up some data here real fast. And I'll use this. Okay. So we get to Friday night, and we'll get to about 10 p.m. I've been watching the past couple of days some model guidance, and it has gone progressively warmer, which you would expect with a further west track almost every single run since the infamous, hey, here comes a winter storm thing. What stands out to me is not only the cold air here, but the dry air. Let me pull up. Let's see here. I thought I had. Here we are. Dew points. They're in the same time period. And here we are. Okay. This signal right here, that's a lot of dry air in place. And so what I'm concerned about for the Poconos, northeastern Pennsylvania, just say northern Sussex County, let's see, it just blanked my mind right around here. What is it called? Poconos, Catskills, Catskills and Hudson River Valley, central Hudson River Valley, right in this area right here. You have cold, dry air being pocketed in, and it's been showing up in the model guidance for the past 3 days for every single model run. The 0Z, the 12Z, and now you can include the 18Z and 16Z guidance. Let's go 18Z guidance during the same time period. It's not completely out yet, so we'll come back to it when it gets all the way out. But what concerns me here is not so much snow, but sleet and freezing rain. I think this could be a real icy mess Friday night for those locations. So we're going to have to watch out to see as this storm evolves and as the storm takes shape here. The latest guidance here comes up and starting to show this icy mix more so than it is snow. Okay, so I'm going to be working on tweaking the impact map for the premium section. I'll have the public section out, of course, about 36 hours ahead of the event, as always. But I am concerned for those locations more for ice than snow. I think if you're looking for snow with this storm, you got to head up towards the Green and White Mountains. If you're a skier, that's where you want to go. Go to Vermont, go to New Hampshire, go to Maine, but you're not going here because this is mostly a rain event, icy for the interior. And I'm very concerned as well with this heavy rainfall in the evening for the coastal plain for some minor coastal flooding. I don't see a lot of wind threat here. I think that, with the jet streak during this time period, it is strong, but I'm questioning whether or not we're going to see the full mixing of this. So, and the reason why is because your strongest pressure gradient is really off to your west with the primary low. So I think that the wind gust threat is going to be limited, but if it does reach you, it will be strong, right? So it's going to be a random wind gust here and there, but I don't see it right now as being a widespread wind event. That could change, but right now that's not what I see. I don't see this jet streak mixing down completely. I will continue to keep an eye on that threat, but typically let's see, where are we? Here we are. When I'm looking at this scenario here, what I want to see for a complete mix down is for some aspect of the mid-level low pressure systems to be closer to the region to enhance that mixing process. Right now, I'm not really seeing that at all, but we'll continue to keep an eye on it. But clearly, this is mostly a rain event for the region. And again, I'll get to all your questions to discuss exactly, to answer any questions you might have on that storm. But certainly, this is a storm where I'm looking at it, and you know what could be interesting with this storm? I'm looking at some of the data here. This is kind of on the fly here for a second, but I'm just kind of hit me here. I really need to consider, with this strong warm air transport taking hold, we could see a line of strong to severe thunderstorms late Friday night and early Saturday morning. See, let's go 6 hours again. Let me go look at the winds. Something maybe I should really consider. Well, you got the strong wind gusts. They are veering. There could be some vertical wind shear. Okay, so this is kind of on the fly based on something I'm seeing here. This is why I love thinking about these live chats, is that sometimes you get to see me change my forecast or adjust something in the forecast live. When I'm looking at this, I really didn't consider, I was so focused more on wintertime forecasting, I really didn't consider this, and I probably should have. You have divergence and diffluence aloft. You have a nice jet streak in the upper levels. You have winds veering at 850 millibars from the south to the southeast, but your winds in the upper levels are coming in from the southwest. So you do have vertical wind shear. So you have vertical wind shear. You have plenty of warm air coming in. You have your heights falling. Yeah. And you have very strong lifting right at the triple point. Yeah, I would say that from Trenton, let's say from Trenton, New Jersey to Belmar, New Jersey on south, including the Philadelphia metro and southeastern Pennsylvania, we'll have a good potential here, I think, of seeing some strong severe thunderstorms out of this and some very heavy rainfall at that. I think north of there, I would not be surprised if we see some very heavy rainfall. I would not be surprised if we have some urban flooding around, let's say, like the Newark area, that area. But yeah, I'm going to have to really put some more thought in the idea of maybe some robust thunderstorms. Something I'm going to sleep on, maybe tackle tomorrow morning in the video discussions. But this is something I really didn't consider until I kind of stepped back and said, okay, it's not just a purely winter storm, it's also a spring storm as well. And that takes me to my spring forecast. Now, obviously, spring is going to be starting off rather chilly, as we all know, with the influence of the MJO and the high latitude blocking breaking down and whatnot. But what about the rest of spring? Well, here's what I see in terms of the rest of spring. I think the primary influence on the rest of spring will come from the MJO. The forcing from stratospheric influences will be going away, which is typical for spring, no matter what the winter does. The polar vortex will collapse and disappear. The stratosphere will warm because you have more direct sunlight, and so on and so forth. So that is no longer a factor. You put that forcing mechanism away and put it in a cabinet. So now your primary forcing mechanism is the MJO. Well, the MJO can change every 30 to 45 days. So that influence, because you don't really have a La Nina influence anymore, and El Nino hasn't developed yet, so you're neutral. So your primary driver is a very chaotic MJO. But what have we seen already? We've already seen that the subtropical jet stream is very active, right? So that factor would increase the potential for severe thunderstorm outbreaks from the southern plains to the Tennessee River Valley to the Mid-Atlantic. So yes, I do think this spring is going to be active. I think it has a chance to feature above normal precipitation. I'm not convinced I'm below normal temperatures, though. I mean, initially, yes. But typically when you have a neutral environment like this that's developing in the spring, you end up with a lot of wild fluctuations. I think we end up near normal, but we won't feel like it's near normal. We'll feel like, 1 week it's going to be in the 70s, maybe a few 80s, and then boom, we fall back into the 50s and 60s, maybe a couple of days in the 40s if you subtract what's going on in March, let's say from late March on through May, right? You have a very volatile weather pattern, I think, on the way. And when the MJO is in phases, in fact, let me pull this up real fast. When the MJO is in phases 3, 4, 5, 6, this side of the aisle, let's say. Actually, you can even divide it like this, 4 through 7, right in here. When it's right in here, we're going to end up with some warm patterns. Here, chilly patterns. But I think that regardless of whether it's chilly or warm, the MJO is going to have these spikes. And we've been seeing them becoming more robust as the La Nina has weakened. And I think we're going to continue to see that with a stronger and stronger MJO signal. And that's going to mean a very active pattern for us. So I expect a lot of severe thunderstorm potential, and I'm expecting above normal rainfall and a very active spring. That is something I'm definitely expecting. Your dominant air mass, I think, is going to be from the Pacific, not from the polar regions and not from the Gulf Coast. The Pacific. Pacific weather patterns tend to be cool initially and then moderate rapidly. So there we go. There we have with that. So those are all my thoughts. Drink some water real fast. And I am going to take your questions. So as always, I take all the questions from the premium chat. All those questions get answered as long as they're fair. And also for the chat for YouTube, I'm just looking at some things over here. I will be answering select questions. So let's see here. We have quite a few questions here, so let's rock this out. Straight Odds says one of those are going to hit. As far as the storms, yeah, I get it. I get what you're saying. You would think if the models keep on producing these solutions, that one's got to be right at some point. And if I was a betting man, which I'm not, but if I was going to bet on a storm happening, this period is the best period we've had since December. Because you had the MJO in phase 8, you have your high latitude blocking potential, you have the disruptor of the polar vortex, you have an active subtropical jet stream, you have a weakening La Nina influence that is going towards neutral. So yes, I get it. Certainly that potential. But understand, we need to get that 50-50 low locked in and strong. Not just meandering weak, but strong. That's what we need to take place. My presumption is that given the pattern we have had all winter, any storm on a mild 10-15 days out will end up either 1 to the west and rain, or 2 sheared apart and basically nothing. Yeah, I could definitely understand that. The one thing I will say in support of a winter storm will be the fact that we have not really had a strong phase 8 MJO signal like we're having with this one. So if there was one reason why I'm curious in seeing how this evolves, it would be that. Another thing that's really interesting, if you look at the evolution of this pattern, I mean, holy smokes. I mean, well, first of all, if this snow takes place in Texas and Arkansas, forget about it. That is a national... That is an emergency unlike any other down there. I used to live down there. Basically what happens is the whole city is shut down. That's it. You're done. And you wait for it to melt. That's essentially what happens. So this would be a disaster down there if this happens. In this setup, if I was just looking purely and not knowing what the winter trends have been and what we've been seeing, this technically would be a perfect setup. You have a high pressure system to the north. It's fresh polar air. Robust system, plenty of moisture to work with. You look at the setup at the various levels of the atmosphere, and you have the ingredients. Now, a couple things that kind of stand out to me when I look at this. Obviously, you have the 50-50 low. This interaction right here, see this feature? See how it kind of bends down like this? If this interacts too early, that would cause this to go into a negative tilt right about here. And that would suggest a storm track that lifts up towards Ohio and then redevelops, which means warm air surges up the coast and then you get that redevelopment. So I'd keep a real careful eye on this interaction. If all this holds true, then if this ends up a little bit too fast, this interaction, then all this warm air, which we have right here, is driven northward. And boy, does it have plenty of warm air to work with. This would be one heck of a gradient. You would have severe thunderstorms on the Gulf Coast, probably some really impressive thunderstorms at that. You'd have some really, really strong, heavy snowfall behind this. The frontogenesis would be really intense if this panned out. But if that interaction is too early, then all this warm air surges up the coast ahead of time, and you look at a blizzard basically setting up for the eastern Great Lakes. Not so much for the northern Mid-Atlantic. So these are just things that I'm seeing and kind of picking apart and saying, well, there's a lot of factors here that if it goes right would be very interesting. But I'm also seeing a lot of features here that, when I look at it, this is probably an error. If this is here, this is probably further south. If this is further south and this is interacting with this feature, that would cause this to be more of a neutral to negative tilt. That would suggest a storm track towards the Ohio River Valley. That would force the warm air northward. That would coincide more with what we're seeing with the ensemble guidance, with the surface low tracking over the Delaware River Valley rather than over the coastal waters. So you can see when you're forecasting these storms, what you have to do is find all the problems with a solution that looks a little too good to be true. 70 millibar polar vortex is stretched from one end of Russia to the other. Oh, yeah. The polar vortex is completely disrupted and stretched and ripped apart at this point. Let's see if we can get the 70 millibars here. Put it on the HD. And let's zoom out. And you can see it. It is just torn and shredded apart. And it's about to split again. By the way, again, if this feature was on our side, February would have looked far different. Completely different. But it is what it is. What does a 10 millibar high pressure do to the atmosphere in your lower levels? Depends on how it forms and the evolution of it. Let's go to... Because first of all, you have to have coupling, okay? So there have been plenty of times where you have all this disruption in the stratosphere, but it doesn't influence the troposphere, okay? So you have to get to that point where you have that coupling. I want to stress this very, very much. I do not take what's going on at 10 millibars and then connect that to whatever's going on in the troposphere. 10 millibars tells me, okay, the disruption's starting. It tells me whether or not the warm air is coming up and we're getting it driven by the EP flux, or if I'm getting it driven by other features like solar activity, for example, in some years where you got that warming that takes place for the entire stratosphere via lack of activity from the sun. That's when we have no sunspots and we have the ozone buildup, and that causes a weakening of the polar vortex that cascades down, or we're getting something that's being driven up from the troposphere into the stratosphere that then sets up what we're seeing now. So 10 millibars tells me about the process. But I don't use it as saying, okay, this is going on 10 millibars, therefore this is happening down here in Freehold. Can't work like that because you have too much of an atmosphere to work with and too many boundary layers to consider before you can even make that connection. So direct influence, very little, if any. Influence in terms of the atmospheric circulation, absolutely, because it kind of gives you the idea of the starting point of the whole evolution of the atmosphere. So if I have a ridge or an upper level ridge over the Arctic in the stratosphere at 10 millibars, it could signal building heights in the troposphere, depending on how it got to that point, and also the degree of interaction between the stratosphere and the troposphere. So there's a lot of factors. It's never, one thing I can tell you, meteorology is never a one-to-one correlation. Ever. Okay? It's always 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 plus A and B and the cosine of E. It's never straight. Okay? You have to always think outside the box and say, okay, this factor is interacting with this factor, but this factor is interacting with that factor. And you have to consider the fact that you could have this scenario set up, but in some cases you have a raging El Nino, so it doesn't matter. Other cases you have what we have right now, so it does matter. But it's in the wrong orientation for us. For Russia and for much of Europe, it's game on. So you can see how all these different factors all play in, and you can never take a hard rule. This is why I do not like using teleconnection of years to try to justify a forecast, because there's always different factors that make a difference, and this year is especially true. I have my doubts about any more snow this month. It seems like winter storms look great 7 days out, and then the potential disappears as it gets closer. The reason why you're seeing that potential disappear is because 7 to 10 days out, there is support for that 50-50 low. And we saw that in the model guidance just last week. We were just talking about it, right? But once we get under 7 days, that support falters and falls away. Now, is that going to be the case this time? I don't know. But we know what we've been seeing the past couple of, months. This is like the worst winter in so long. Yeah, it's pretty rough for snow lovers. So you say that La Nina is over yet. You say SOI is still La Nina, so which is it? Okay, good question. Okay. The ways that we measure La Nina, there are a variety of ways, okay? In terms of the support from the sea surface temperatures, it's dead, done, gone. So that's step one. But what about influence on the atmosphere? Well, that's a different story. Think of the influence like, let's say you have a rock, right? And you threw the rock in the pond. Well, you don't have the rock anymore. The rock is done. That's it. It's gone. It's out of your hand. It's in the pond. You're not getting it back, okay? It's with the fishes. So that part's done. It's never coming back. But the ripple effects still remain. So the SOI is the lingering ripple effects of our La Nina. And so as long as we have those ripple effects in the water, so to speak, until they work themselves out, we still have to consider La Nina's influence on these patterns, on the 500 millibar pattern, certainly through March. Once we get to April, that influence could be gone completely. I expect it to be gone completely. In the winter forecast, we talked about the idea of the La Nina weakening. And one thing I said is like, yes, I do expect La Nina to weaken. But I still am keeping that southeast ridge as a factor, but displaced. So the ripples are there, but we don't get rid of them until April. So you have to consider that factor in that southeast ridge as a feature to contend with whenever you're forecasting for the medium range. Let's see. Jones is asking, Jones Mark, all right. It's at least the worst winter since 2002. Yeah, I can understand that again. Yeah, that takes me back. I was in college. I was in Oswego. We were getting all the snow, and my parents were like, oh, it's great down here. We're not getting anything. Then they called me up because we had that winter storm that wasn't. And, everyone was talking about it. A big storm, and then it missed to the east. That was something. Jonathan Cohen asks, if El Nino looks likely to develop by the summer, what do you expect would be the impact on the Bermuda High and Mid-Atlantic heat waves? That's a great question. A lot of that depends on the orientation and strength of El Nino. Right now, it looks like a weak El Nino, possibly central based, but that's still to be debated, and that could change quite a bit. We're not even at the starting stages of El Nino. It's that a lot of models are suggesting that it's going to be developing, so we'll have to wait and see. If we get more convection around the date line, then I expect us to see a Bermuda High set up off the coast, and we're under a trough. So that would support humid summers, but also very wet and active one as well, because those cold fronts will be coming in and then stalling out over the region. If the convection is focused more towards Hawaii, though, let me think about this here. Yeah. If the convection is focused more towards Hawaii, then I think that we'll see that ridge able to build a little bit closer to the coast. Either way, we still end up with an active subtropical jet stream. But then the other factor that I'm still trying to figure out is, while that El Nino is developing, what is the QBO doing in terms of all that additional water vapor in the atmosphere? Remember that volcano. We can't forget that. So the circulation in the stratosphere and top of the troposphere starts to influence the circulation that drives El Nino. And so that displacement is still unknown. So that could lead to a persistent southwesterly or southerly wind pattern along the East Coast. But also it would lead to increased shear in the tropical Atlantic. So the hurricane season, I think, is going to have some major issues with that. But I'm not sure exactly how the cold front placements are going to work in that respect. So there's still a lot I have to work on to break all that down. From New Jersey, from let's say Middlesex County up to western Essex County, are you pretty much expecting all rain, if some snow sleet at the beginning? Will it be on colder surfaces, roads, maybe just wet? Okay, so for Friday, for those locations, I think that it starts off briefly as snow and sleet, kind of like this last storm, but warmer, because we don't really have a secondary. So this is a warmer storm overall. So I do expect some slick roadways on Friday night in those locations, but the changeover to rain will be faster. And it'll be very heavy at that. I'm telling you, snow and ice is going to be the least of your concerns in those locations. Are you expecting flooding to be an issue this spring with above normal precip? Yes, I do. I definitely do, yes. Some serious cross-equatorial flow from the Pacific at 250. Yeah, we've been seeing that a little bit more. It's an interesting feature that's been showing up. I am not well-versed enough in wind patterns in the tropics at those levels to really give a defined answer of why we're seeing that. But I know that research is being done on it, and I'm keeping an eye on it via the AMS. So if I learn something new, I'll let you know. Is it possible one of the late cutters could give a 50 low for a following storm? It's possible, sure. I mean, that's how some of these 50 lows form. But thus far, we have yet to see that actually be achieved. Real severe and tornado risks in the next 2 days down south. Absolutely. Western U.S. also getting real cold stuff, ice pellets in Burbank, California. California is getting... Look, you cannot pay me to move to California. That state is a natural disaster state. I will never move over there. And the reason why is because you get snow, ice, flooding, drought, fire tornadoes, regular tornadoes, tropical storms down towards Southern California, earthquakes, volcanoes. No way am I ever living in that state. Ever. They're having a horrible time of it. I hope those people are all right. So if we get an El Nino, do we want East Base or West Base for a good winter? And what do you think it will be? I don't know what it'll be. I'll put that right now. I don't know yet. I have no clue. What you want is a West Base El Nino, because then you got your warmest waters towards the date line, which drives more convection. The more convection mirrors an MJO phase 8, which then supports more winter storms. Droughts are part of the natural cycle. Yes, they are. They are definitely part of the natural cycle there. In fact, they've had a drought so bad from 1190 to 1250 that literally wiped out an entire civilization out there. So yeah, it's a totally natural factor. And wow, look at this. Well, YouTube is very active. Let's see here. Captain Nebulous asks, so earlier on GFS output from mid-March, the PV relocates and slightly strengthens to Western Canada, Strat high builds in the east, end of winter weather. Okay, so by mid-March, you start moving into spring mode. And in the stratosphere, what happens is that you get this reconsolidation of the polar vortex, but it's nothing like what you would see during the winter with this process. Excuse me. So what happens is that in this natural process that takes place, the polar jet stream contracts and starts to lift northward. And that's when we start to see our spring pattern really take hold. It gets harder and harder to have winter weather. As we all know, it can happen still. How many not spring training, but first day of baseball, we've seen the first game, opening day, get snowed out in various outside of Colorado. Okay, we've seen that before. It can happen, but typically that's what it means. Oh, Dylan, I'm just going to say this. The more you ask about severe thunderstorms, the more you just jinx yourself. You don't want severe thunderstorms where you live, or anywhere really, but you don't want it where you live. Trust me, especially if you're a homeowner. You don't want that anywhere near you. Is it possible for Cape May to see severe thunderstorms? It is possible, yes. How does the long-range pattern look for starting baseball practice March 18th on? That's an interesting question. I would say that you're going to have some trouble. Have backup plans for indoor practice. I don't know if you can pull that off, but does the setup for around March 12th resemble the December setup in any way? Models showed a KU-type storm 2 weeks out, but was ultimately a rainstorm. You can't really compare the two. In December, you have a changing wavelength heading towards more amplification. You have colder air masses overall. You have less sunlight to deal with. It's a completely different environment. So you really can't make the comparison between the two or take anything from either situation. Do you think we could see some tornadoes? Why do you want to see tornadoes? Honestly, even people look, even storm chasers don't. You know what storm chasers want to see? They want to see an F5 tornado in the middle of a field by some cows. That's it. Why do you in this area? Why would you want to see a tornado? I don't get it. Please help me understand. Maybe I don't want to know. I don't know. But I will say this, that the potential for vertical wind shear supporting a tornado or two is certainly present this spring. I'll put it that way. What is the difference between spring and meteorological spring? Okay, all right, good deal. All right, so meteorological spring is basically how meteorologists categorize the seasons, right? So that way we can make climatological data and statistics. So meteorologists really, really like we're kind of like, apartment owners. We like everything to start on the first of the month, right? So December, or winter, is December 1st through February 28th. Nice, easy. You can make the statistics. Very, very straightforward, right? Obviously, we know the heart of winter, really, for our region, starts December 15th or so, really takes hold after December 25th, and starts to tail off after February 20th. But that isn't true for everybody. See, the Rockies, really, winter starts in October. For the Southeast, some argue winter never starts. So we kind of make this simple. Everybody starts December 1st and ends February 28th. Everyone starts spring March 1st and it ends May 31st. And then in summer, it starts June 1st, even though some may argue in the South that it starts in February. And it ends on August 31st. So that's why we do it the way we do it. But in terms of spring, like with astronomy, that's based on the position of the Earth and sunlight. So that would be, for example, when we start spring with astronomy, 12 hours of sunlight and then 12 hours of darkness. Same thing with fall, right? That's the start of fall. And then you trend towards more sunlight when you're heading towards summer until the start of summer, which is when we're at the longest day, the peak sunlight, and then we start to tail off again. So that's how they determine spring and summer. Let's see here. Talk Team Astronomy Spring is still based on equinox? Yes. Yep. Okay, good deal. I think that answered all those questions. Wow, we're making some pretty good time. I kind of lost. Okay, speaking of baseball, Saul DeGrom is hurt again. Yankee fans here, but real smart move by the Mets, letting him go elsewhere. I hope DeGrom has a great time in Texas. I hope he has plenty of barbecue. I hope he'll miss whenever he plays the Mets, because if he's actually on the field and on the mound, he is dominant. With that said, I can't have a pitcher be on the DL every 15 minutes. Potential's great. When he's on the field, he's amazing. The problem is that I can't get him on the field. So it was time to move on. I hope he does great. I hope he has an amazing rest of his career. But I don't have confidence in that. So, all right. So, let's see here. We got about another 6 minutes before my voice completely goes. I might not be able to do videos tomorrow because my voice is really starting to get that itchy. I might get like some green tea after this or something. You know, because it's that time of year in spring where I start getting my voice losing and all that stuff. So. Yes, we have been running back and forth from our house to the apartment, to the apartment, to the house, and the house to the apartment. So it's been fun. Sort of like Aaron Hicks with the Yankees. Great talent, never plays due to injury. Yeah, that's a good comparison. Okay, so we got all the questions answered on YouTube. And all the questions answered on Premium Chat. Okay, so before I lose my voice completely, I think we'll call it a night so I can do videos tomorrow morning. Thank you, as always, for coming in and visiting. Absolutely great questions tonight. I really, really appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you guys next week where, who knows, maybe we're talking about a major winter storm. Oh, did you close? Yeah, we're closed. We're good on the house.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, we have it.
Our house.
It's our house. We own it. The utilities are under ours. Yep. It's just a matter of we have some work to do on it first, and then we're gonna move in. You know, we want.
We're bringing some stuff over and working on some stuff.
Yeah, it's a slow move, but I think it's well worthwhile. So it's gonna be very interesting times. Thanks as always. I will see you guys next week, where hopefully maybe we're talking about a winter storm, but probably not. Have a good night and stay safe out there.